Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the BSI webinar today, What You Need to Know About the Revision of BS 8214 on Fire Resisting and Smoke Control Doors. My name is Joanne Scott, and I am a Standards Development Manager here at BSI in the built environment, and I look after B538 Doors and Windows, which looks after this standard. Next slide, please. Before we start today, I would just like to mention that Steve Hill from the Door and Hardware Federation will not be joining us today, but we do have three experts, and I'm going to introduce them before we hand over to them to speak today. Firstly, I'd like to introduce you to Kevin Underwood, who's the Technical Director of the British Woodworking Federation and has worked in the joinery industry for 40 years. Kevin is the chair of the BSI Technical Committee B538 that oversees the product standards for doors, including fire doors, windows, and shutters, and makes an active contribution to many British and European standards committees, and advises on issues such as the Construction Products Regulation and Building Regulations. Next up, we have Peter Barker, who's the Technical Policy Manager at Warrington Fire. Peter has worked for over 20 years in the field of passive fire protection, specialising in supporting engineers producing assessments and classifications of fire-resisting construction products. Peter is an active member of various committees within BSI and CEN, and is convener of CEN-TC 127 Working Group 7, which is responsible for the EN 13501 series of standards. And finally, we have Douglas Masterson, who is the Technical and Training Director at the Guild of Architectural Ironmongers. Douglas currently serves as Chair of the BSI Technical Committee B5384 Building Hardware, and represents the UK at both CEN and ISO levels across multiple committees, and brings over 35 years of experience in the architectural hardware industry. Next slide, please. So fire doors play a critical role in protecting lives, property, and escape routes. And with the release of BS 8214 2026, the expectations, responsibilities, and best practices around designing, specifying, installing, and maintaining these systems have evolved. The revision introduces significant new guidance, including expanded coverage beyond timber doors, updates to smoke control guidance, and clearer installation requirements, amongst other revisions. Next slide, please. So we had a kickoff meeting back in February of 2023. There was 19 experts on the panel and a mammoth 343 comments received at draft for public comment. That's the DPC stage. There was 19 comments resolution meetings. Finally, publication in March of 2026. Next slide, please. So an overview of today's agenda. I will hand over to our experts in a moment, but it gives you an overview. We'll have the three speakers, followed by an expert panel discussion with some closing remarks from our panel chair, Kevin Underwood. Next slide, please. Just some housekeeping before we start. This is a listen-only webinar. Your microphones and cameras are disabled for the duration. Please submit your questions, including the name of the speaker and the questions intended for, via the question button, and they will be addressed after the presentations. For any technical issues, report them through the same question button. After completing the post-event feedback survey, BSI will provide a link to the recording. This is a CPD accredited webinar. To request your certificate, please complete the survey. And finally, BSI hosts various events throughout the year. To learn more, please scan the QR code. Next slide, please. So I would just like to hand you over to our first panel webinar speaker today, Kevin Underwood. Over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Joanne. I will click forward. There we go. Right, this afternoon I'm going to look at an overview of the changes that were made to BS 8214. This was a full revision of the standard. As a standards developers, we have an option of generating an amendment, which is a defined change limited to an existing standard, or a revision, which is a more substantial alteration to what was published before. We've touched on some of the themes of the changes that we've covered in this revision, and primarily, as you can tell in the titles that are on screen now, we've moved away from timber-based fire door assemblies into a more widely encompassing fire-resisting and smoke-controlled doors, and practical considerations around the specification, design, performance in use code of practice. It has principally incorporated more materials and more detail on what affects fire doors. First of all, I'd like to thank the team that enabled us to run this project. First of all, the committee manager, Joanne Scott, who you've already met, but also two important people, our editorial project managers, Kemi Ho and Beverly Goodchild, without whose help and encouragement, I don't think we would have managed to get through this project. I'd also like to thank the team at BSI, because I know that there are a lot of people behind the scenes who were acting to help support this change, and certainly at the end when we were doing the final editing to get the standard ready for publication. And of course, I'd like to thank all the members of the drafting panel, which was B538111. Next slide, please. So the committee structure within BSI, at the head of the structure is the technical committee B538, which I chair, and that covers all aspects of doors, windows, shutters, hardware, and curtain walling. Below that, there is the subcommittee B5381, which specifically covers windows and doors. And then as a panel associated with B5381, we had B538111, which was the specific drafting panel for this revision of BS 8214. This is a temporary panel, so it will be dissolved once this work is completed. Next slide, please. So the committee structure itself, or the panel, was made up of trade associations, testing and certification bodies, fire safety consultants, the Fire and Rescue Service, the Police Service, Building Control, and manufacturers. The full committee, the organisations that were involved can be seen on the BSI Standards Development Portal. Next slide, please. So the timeline for the project. We issued a project proposal on the BSI Standards Development Portal for public comment in March 2022. And I think, as Joanne has already said, that the first meeting of the committee was in February 2023. In that time, Joanne and I were putting together the project proposal within BSI. Not all requests from technical committees to revise standards are accepted, and there has to be a case made to justify the work to be put in the revision of a standard. So we successfully managed to create the case to have BS 8214 revised, and we kicked off that work in February 2023. The drafting of the revision took us 18 months from that date, and we then managed to create the draft for public comment, which was issued for commenting on the BSI Standards Development Portal and to the relevant technical committees within BSI between September, and the commenting period ran from September to November 2024. So we're now 21 months into the actual project, not counting the time for the business plan. When we took another 16 months to go through the comments that were received, I think 370 or so that we got. So we're now at 37 months, and we finally published the revised standard in 20th of March this year. So in all, from the first project through to the publication of the standard, that was 38 months. And I think it's surprising that it took us almost as long to go through the comments as it did to make the initial revision to the standard. It just shows the very valuable contribution that the public commenting phase made towards the development of this revision. Next slide, please. So in the early days of the project development, we were debating within the technical committee B5381 how we would structure the new standard. The existing version, or 2016 version of 8214, specifically covered timber products only. It came about as a revision of the previous version of BS 8214, which did include references to materials of fire doors of other materials. When it came to the project to produce the 2016 revision, we actually didn't have enough expertise in the other materials to warrant including information in that revision. In the B5381 committee, it was debated whether there should be 3 separate standards or 3 separate codes of practice, one for each of the main materials, timber, metal, and composite. But then we also countered that with saying, well, we should have one code of practice and perhaps annexes where it was necessary to highlight differences in the fire door performance of different materials. So it was option 2 that we went for, but readers of 8214 2026 will also note that we didn't need to introduce annexes for the different materials, because there was so much in common between the requirements for each type of product that it wasn't necessary to have them. In fact, the significant difference between the timber doors and fire doors of other materials is that the metal doors and composite doors were generally supplied as door sets, and it was only in the timber area that the supply chain using fire door assemblies, which are constructed on the construction site, was commonly used. So we've gone for a single standard, as you've noted, and we didn't need to introduce annexes that were relevant to other materials. Next slide, please. One of the things that came through in the public commenting phase is we were asked questions about the devolved building regulations, and we couldn't include normative references to the devolved regulations. So I've listed them all here. We have, in the UK, we have different building regulation guidance for England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And as this is a British standard code of practice, we needed to have information that would be relevant for all uses within the UK. So we couldn't go into the details related to specific guidance in the guidance documents for each of the devolved parliaments. Next slide, please. We also couldn't include normative references to regulations. So, for example, the Building Safety Act or the Fire Safety England regulations or the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005. Again, these are not used all across the UK, and therefore would only be relevant to those parts of the United Kingdom in which those regulations were enforced. So we, again, couldn't within the code of practice put a call that people should follow particular aspects in relation to fire doors that related to any particular piece of legislation. Next slide, please. So people have asked, and also in the commenting phase, why we have used the term fire door to name the separating piece in a wall. There were various options put forward: fire door set, fire door assemblies, fire door kits, or even the fire door leaf. But we looked at fire door and followed the principle that was established by the English Fire Safety Guidance in Approved Document B. So in there, it says that a fire door set, and it's referring for fire door sets in Approved Document B, is a complete door assembly assembled on site or delivered as a completed assembly consisting of the door frame, leaf or leaves, essential hardware, edge seals, and glazing, and any integral side panels or fan light panels in an associated door screen. Now, those of us that work in standards reserve door set for a particular type of supply route. Product usually is supplied from a single source, and it comes with most of the components assembled to site. So we didn't like to use fire door set because we also wanted to allow the option of fire doors to be provided as door assemblies or door kits. So we've opted for fire door. I think that's fairly commonly used. If you're sitting in a room and you look across at the door that's on that room, you generally refer to it as a fire door. You wouldn't know just by looking at it how it arrived in that location, whether it's supplied as a door set, a door kit, or a door assembly. But once it's installed into the building, then it's generally referred to as a fire door. So we've kept that within the standard. Next slide, please. Following the public commenting phase, the panel, there were certain restrictions that we could then do with the changes to the standard. So the panel could make changes to the code of practice if the panel accepted a comment that required the text to be altered. So if that was as a consequence of a comment made in the commenting phase. And the panel could correct the language used to better explain or an element of the code of practice, but so improve on something that was already there. But what we couldn't do, we could not make changes to the code of practice that were not initiated by a comment received during the public commenting phase. Now, I think everyone would appreciate that in the time that we were running the project, there was a lot going on in relation to building regulations and legislation around fire doors. There was a lot of work going on in European standards, and it was very tempting to make changes on the fly within the revision. But we had to follow these rules. We were kept on track by the editorial project managers. We could not make changes that weren't previously seen in the public commenting phase. That would then warrant a second DPC. We wanted to make sure that we got this project put through in time without having to instigate a second public commenting phase. There were some rules in how we then had to go through the project. Next slide, please. So relationship with other code practices, this was important to us. We didn't want the contents of 8214 to then contradict any of the other code of practices that related to fire safety, and principally 9991 and 9999. Next slide, please. So we reviewed the order of the sections, and as a guide, we then followed the RIBA plan of works so that we had all the design work and specification done first, the product manufacturing, installation, handover, etc. Prior to following this principle, the sections of 8214 were not in the logical order as the project would be run on site. Next slide, please. Competence, I think this is going to be talked about by other presenters as well, but the code of practice calls upon individuals and organizations who undertake a function in relation to fire doors to be competent, and they should have the necessary skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviors to fulfill the function. And further information on how someone is seen to be competent for their function can be found on the BSI Built Environment Competence Hub, which looks at the work that the Industry Competence Steering Group is doing with their sector-led groups on various aspects of construction. Next slide, please. Specifying fire door requirements. The key characteristics of fire door are fire resistance and smoke control, but they will have other performance requirements. For example, I won't go through all of these. We've got enhanced security, durability, self-closing. The key aspect of this change is that one particular function should not compromise the performance of all the other functions. Next slide, please. Supporting evidence. Supporting evidence, again, I think we're going to go into this more detail, but supporting evidence can include test reports, DIAPS, direct application reports, XAPS, extended application reports, field application reports, and technical assessments. And if technical assessments are undertaken, they should be done in accordance with the PFPF guide, but also note that there is a project underway to draft a new code of practice for technical assessments, BS 8623. Next slide, please. Smoke control. The recommended class for smoke control is SA4 from BSEN 13501 Part 2. That's a European classification. We would also consider classifications using the national standard for smoke control. But the principle is that we're looking at, that we want to note the leakage of smoke at the threshold. And we have removed the prescriptive 3mm gap below the door leaf because we didn't believe that that gave a true representation of smoke control. Next slide, please. Installation of fire doors. The compatibility of door, so we're looking at, first of all, the door frames have to be compatible with the surrounding structure. Need to ensure that the gaps around the door frames to be installed are within the scope of the materials that are being used for the installation. And fire doors installers are discouraged from attempting to make good deficiencies in the surrounding structure. Next slide, please. Continue with installation. Sealing between the door and the surrounding structure. Tested performance of sealants either in a fire test or a linear gap seal. And there remain prescriptive fire stopping installation scenarios for timber-based fire doors using stone wool and mastic. But in those scenarios, the sealants used should have had their performance supported by test evidence. And next slide. I think that's it. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I would like to now hand over to our next speaker, Peter Barker. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you very much, Joanne. Yes, I'm going to be talking about fire door classifications and supporting evidence and the updates that we've made within BS 8214 2026. So just to cover three main topics, and these topics are referred to throughout BS 8214, and that is some of the differences, the classification differences between British and European standards when it comes to fire resisting doors. Also the process of determining fire resistance and the performance of fire resisting doors, and understanding evidence requirements, both the form that it takes, which Kevin mentioned briefly in his presentation a moment ago, but also understanding how that evidence can be applied in practice. And essentially, everything that I'm going to be talking about now sits within a specific annex. That's Annex B, which is titled Fire Door Classifications. But there's a bit more in there than just classification information. So my presentation will be focusing in on this Annex B and how it's then referred to throughout BS 8214. So what has changed and why? So what I mean by that is what has changed since the 2016 version of BS 8214 and what's influenced those changes into the 2026 version. Well, Kevin has also mentioned that a lot has happened and a lot was still happening whilst we were drafting the standard. But going back to 2018 with the report produced by Dame Judith Hackett following the Grenfell Tower fire, looking at the providing an independent review of building regulations and fire safety. And something that was picked up very early on and quoted as saying, the system that covers product testing, labeling and marketing is at least as complex as the entire regulatory system, and difficult to know if what is supporting the products being used. We also had the Morell and Day report, the independent review into construction product testing, looking at how the construction product system may be strengthened. We also had the announcement of BS 476 being withdrawn from approved document B and also being withdrawn as a standard or series of standards in preference of the European classification system. We also had the Building Safety Act, looking at the introduction of the Building Safety Regulator and the National Regulator for Construction Products, driving that stronger enforcement, accountability, more questions on evidence and performance claims. And we had the Green Paper at the time, which has now been followed up with the White Paper on Construction Products Reform, among other pieces that were landing, really creating a different regulatory landscape and a lot of questions around supporting evidence and compliance. So a lot of drive to make sure that whatever went into this update for BS 8214, that one of the things that we addressed is that understanding the supporting evidence and making sure that the right evidence is being supplied to support those claims, to meet those compliance claims, was going to be a very important part of 8214. So being able to steer users in the right direction when trying to satisfy building regulation requirements and so on. So supporting evidence, the importance of supporting evidence and how to understand it has been expanded and clarified. And just to give you a flavour, I did a search for the word evidence within 8216, the 2016 version, and it pops up 26 times. In the 2026 version, it's now referenced 165 times. Perhaps a bit of a sort of crude yardstick, but one that does indicate how much more has been folded in, just to give guidance on what should be being supported by evidence and how to navigate to the right documentation. Also within there, in response to the 476 withdrawal, in the main, is to expand on the fire door performance classifications and the differences between BS and EN. And a lot of this was in the 2016 version, but like I say, it's been expanded and clarified against those sections that Kevin called up, from specification through installation, and Douglas will touch on hardware and other things shortly. Okay, so start with classification differences. I'm dealing with them in the order that Annex B brings them up. So in Annex B, section B12, it gives a description of the national system under the BS 476 regime. And if I just run through some of the sort of key points related to that national system, we'll start with the column there with testing. So the BS 476 series is actually was originally developed back in 1932. It was a single standard back then, covering both resistance and reaction to fire. And then over time, it's gradually been split into specific parts, dealing with things like non-load bearing elements, in which fire resisting doors are tested, BS 476 part 22. And we also have a specific test method for smoke control of doors as well. And I'll talk a little bit about the determination process shortly, but we have some specific British standards that are used for evaluating the fire resistance performance of doors. Now, when it comes to the national system, when it comes to extending the scope beyond what has been tested using supporting test evidence, we use a process called assessment. And effectively, that's the application of expert judgment by experts in that field with experience of testing those construction products. And it gives a considered opinion based on suitable and sufficient evidence as to the scope of application, the different designs that could be supported by that test evidence. The output of that process, and what I mean by that is what's communicated by that process is the performance of that product against the standard. So you'll get a time to failure in the test reports, and then the assessment will give you an opinion as to the likely performance of that product were it to be tested to that standard. And in the final column called performance classification there, when it comes to fire resisting doors, we do have some terms that are recognized. These are called up in approved document B. I do point out that you don't have these equivalent terms in the technical handbook, although integrity and smoke leakage rate are called up. And we have FD, which is normally sits in front of a number denoting the period of integrity fire performance, which is the amount of time that an element of construction can hold back fire before the fire penetrates. And then if there is a smoke control performance for that door, it has a suffix S, which indicates that the door has a leakage rate of less than 3 meters cubed per linear meter of seal every hour at ambient temperatures. So recognised as a performance classification for doors, but called up in approved document B and recognised for those characteristics assigned to that door. Now, under the European classification system, in Annex B, B13, it picks up as a specific section there, and then you can start seeing some of the differences. Now, the European classification system was developed more recently than the 476 series in response to the single market requirements at the CPD at the time, the Construction Products Directive at the time, but now the Construction Products Regulation, with a need to find common technical language, remove technical barriers to trade, and have a recognised single method for evaluating construction products and a way of communicating that performance by way of a classification system. So that's where we now have the EN test standards, 1634.1 and 1634.3. Part 1 being for fire, Part 3 being for smoke. A different way of extending the scope of application using a more rule-based system to keep with that common technical language known as direct application and extended application. And then the output, although it's still a performance, it's a classified performance, and these performance characteristics are classified using another series of standards, which is the EN 13501 series. And based on that evidence, you can then get performance classifications like I've listed in the box there, where E stands for integrity, I for insulation, SA4 is this indication of leakage rate with that without an permeable seal at the thresholds, some sort of seal, drop seal or fin or blade maintaining contact with the floor. And that classification system is recognised across Europe. That was its purpose, and is then assigned to the door. And that's the shift towards the classification system using these ways of denoting the performances for those particular products. So they're the differences explained in the sections. As you work your way through the Annex B, we move on to Annex B2. There's a section specifically on the determination process. So it talks about, first of all, testing and what goes into testing a door. And it talks about things being tested to benchmark standards. I've mentioned both the British standard version and the EN version for testing doors. And effectively, these benchmark standards are conditions that can be repeated to evaluate the performance of the product in standardized test conditions. And for fire resistance, we effectively look for that to be a fully developed, it's a model of a fully developed compartment fire effectively after the flashover phase, where everything in that compartment is on fire. And you can see an example in the top right there of the curve that we use, the ISO 834 curve as it's known, showing the time along the bottom and the temperature as we increase the temperature inside the furnace. It points out that complete assemblies are tested, So it's the complete product, the hardware, the frames, the seals, and everything that goes into that door. That's how we evaluate the door within a supporting construction, exposed to those test conditions, which are given in the test standard, along with the time temperature curve, the instrumentation, the modes of failure, what to record, what goes into a test report. And then on completion of that test, that information is collated into a test report, and that test report is a statement of fact. It tells you what was tested, conditions under which it was tested, the method against which it was tested, and the results from that test. As we move through Annex and the section B2, it also gives more information on the determination process as it relates to extending the scope. And I've mentioned that under the national system, we use assessments, that judgment based on suitable and sufficient evidence as to the field of application for the products. And under EM, we use EXAP, extended application, which is a rule-based system. But conceptually, a similar approach. You take a bank of evidence. You can see a pile of reports at the top there. We take that report, and based on that evidence, we're looking to widen the scope, either by interpolating the results, so what scope is covered by the results, or extrapolating to see if there's extension to scope that can be offered from that test evidence. Now, in the national approach, we use a guiding document. Kevin mentioned the PFPF guide. That is, there's further work taking place within BSI to develop a code of practice called BS 8623 for the process of assessment outside of European classification. And inside EXAP, we use a series of standards called EXAP standards, which for doors is in the EN 15269 series. And it's that information that can then be used for a European classification. And just to give you a flavour of what goes into these assessments, so whereas the test report's a statement of fact, an assessment or an EXAP gives you that scope, covering some of the things that I put on the report there, the dimensions that are permitted, configurations, hardware options, seals, glazing, lipping, sizing, door frames, installation, decorative finishes. And this assessment is often the document that will sit behind and support the third-party certification that we have within the third-party certification schemes that are used within this country, as well as regulated CPR stuff when it comes to CE marking as well, but only EXAPs and classification reports in that case. So that's a determination process. So a flavour on the testing process, the differences between the European and British BS 476 system. What about understanding the evidence requirements? So this was an important part of updating. So if you look on the screen there, we've got an example of how supporting evidence is referred to throughout BS 8214. For example, fire doors should be purchased as coordinated assemblies in accordance with the manufacturer's specification, backed by supporting evidence. You can see again, supporting evidence should be provided to demonstrate the fire door, and so on. So it's used a lot throughout the whole document, this collective term of supporting evidence. So understanding the different forms that it takes is very important, because although fire testing, as I've explained, is a building block of generating that base evidence, it tells you just on what was tested. So not always will be getting the test report the thing that you need to understand whether or not the thing in front of you is supported. But it's an important part. So we have fire test reports. You may also have technical assessments. They could be a specific design assessment, an alteration to a tested product, or they could be a field of application, like I've described, these wider assessments that are used to give a field of application based on a series of test reports. Other pieces of evidence could be a European classification or an EXAP report. There are also other documents that would be considered supporting evidence, such as technical documents and relevant installation instructions for CE mark or UKCA mark product, of which doors, somewhat confusingly at the moment, some fall within regulation, so therefore would be CE marked, and others don't, like internal sets. So you could expect to see this. You would also expect to see it on hardware items as well. There could be other information and data. It mentioned that we have specialized functions. Fire doors do all sorts of other functions as well. So there may be some information there on acoustic or durability to give you some information on those specific functions to be supported by evidence. But also a code of practice could even be considered a supporting evidence document. For example, the prescriptive ways of installing doors using rock fiber and mastic. The code of practice could then be used to support that particular install, providing it's been considered as appropriate for the door that's being installed. So lots of different forms that it can take. So what does it mean in terms of understanding it? Well, it was very important, and what we wanted to do is where you see there an approved document B, that's just an example where a performance claim is required or performance requirement is given for a door in a particular location. And you look within the code of practice, how do you go about navigating all these different forms of evidence? Because they're not all compatible with one another. They have to be carefully checked to make sure that you're not making claims that aren't in fact correct, because the documents were never meant to talk to one another and work with one another. So, for example, test reports, understanding that they are statements of fact, that any judgment beyond that should be contained within a formal assessment. Understanding that assessments of performance are self-contained, and you have to be very careful and cautious against using assessments on assessments. You would need it to be re-evaluated, otherwise you could be drifting further and further away from the thing that was tested. Third-party certification, understanding that you can only use third-party certification within the rules specified within third-party certification. Just because it's been certified doesn't mean it will work with another certified product unless there's that link. European classification and EXAP, understanding the differences as to what that means and what can be used in that process. Product technical documents, understanding the CE marking, UKCA marking, declarations of performance, and what can work within that arrangement and that system. If you get any information and data from data sheets from manufacturers, making sure that you can interrogate that with supporting evidence as required. The data sheets themselves may provide useful information, but it's the evidence that sits behind that would need to be would support the performance claims, and also understanding how a code of practice can be used to support a particular application as described within that code of practice, such as BS 8214. And all of this is in that final part of Annex B, which is in Annex B3. Annex B3.1 is the forms of evidence, and Annex B3.2 is the use of the supporting evidence. And I think right on time, it's a summary slide. As I've just said, Annex B, essential for understanding future fire door specifications, just so you know the differences between EN and 476. Section B2, determining that process helps to explain the regime for testing doors using BS and EN standards. And then finally, what I've just talked through is that different forms of evidence and how you can use that evidence to evaluate product performance and demonstrate compliance with regulatory requirements. That's me. Thank you very much. And I'll now hand over to Douglas.
Thank you, Peter. Just before I hand over to Douglas, I have to say thank you, Peter, for your presentation. So Douglas, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Just bear with us a second until we get our technology in order. And we're off. Nearly. Okay, so today we're going to take a look at the critical role of fire door hardware. And the agenda, what we'll be looking at is as follows. So the importance of the correct door hardware on a fire door. We'll look at the necessity for competence when specifying door hardware for fire doors. We'll look at essential and non-essential hardware, which is going to be in Annex D. And then we'll give you some further sources of information as well. So let's look at the importance of the correct door hardware on a fire door first. Now, hardware, otherwise known as architectural ironmongery, directly affects both integrity and smoke control on fire doors. And BS 8214 highlights that every essential component, and all the essential components are listed in Annex D. These include products such as hinges, locks and latches, door closers, intumescent protection, they all must match the tested configuration for the specific door design. Now that's really important because incorrect or incompatible hardware can undermine the fire resistance rating, it can compromise closing reliability, and it can invalidate supporting evidence, and even small variations such as different hinge screws or different latch positions can change test outcomes. Because essential hardware is required to maintain performance under fire exposure. And this includes hardware that supports structural stability, enables controlled closing forces, sustains latch engagement, and also activates intumescent protection in the event of a fire. Now, it does also signpost in the standard that users are advised to consider the desirability of sourcing door hardware and seals from a manufacturer that operates as a member of a third-party certification scheme. The thing about BS 8214 in hardware is that it looks at all different stages, as Kevin had mentioned earlier. It goes from specification right through to installation and even into maintenance, and hardware is mentioned in that context as well. So installation and fitting of door hardware is also of huge importance, specifically covered in section 10.2. And door hardware should be fitted so the fire resisting performance of the door is not compromised. So it means that installation should follow tested or approved fixings and supporting evidence. Also, intumescent protection and smoke control should be maintained because poor hardware installation can critically weaken the door leaf and therefore it can undermine fire performance. In addition to that, it states that maintenance information in relation to doors and hardware should be provided as part of the handover process within the operation and maintenance manuals. Now, mortising, when we're coming into installation, is specifically referenced, and factory preparation of mortises is actually preferred wherever possible. It states that on-site mortising should be avoided, but if it's unavoidable, should be done by a competent person, should follow manufacturer specifications and test evidence. It also states that mortises should be cut accurately, avoiding unnecessary gaps. But as it says, it's preferred that they are factory prepared on fire doors. I'm not going to go into too much detail on supporting evidence because that's already been covered with Peter. But just to state again, that clause 3.24 defines supporting evidence as the documentary proof that a fire door, which includes all hardware fitted, provided it's declared fire and or smoke performance. So there's a list of some of supporting evidence there, but I won't go into those again in detail because, as I say, Peter's already picked up on those earlier. Why is the supporting evidence required? Well, it's because a fire door will only perform as tested when all the components, which includes the hardware, match what was used in either the original test or the technical assessment. And BS 8214 makes it clear that changing hardware without supporting evidence can invalidate the fire door's performance. And this principle is repeated throughout the standard in a number of clauses. The fire and smoke seals are also mentioned in BS 8214, particularly as part of essential hardware. So intumescent seals that are used to seal between the frame and the supporting construction should be included in a fire-resistant test of a fire door in accordance with 47622 or 1634 Part 1 and should meet the required performance class for the installation. And again, Peter's referred to that earlier. It's the same with smoke seals. Required performance relevant to the door design, but in this case, it should be tested in accordance with BS 47631.1 or BSEN 1634.3 and should not compromise the fire performance of the door when it's fitted. All fixing methods for intumescent seals should be covered by supporting evidence, and fire and smoke seals must remain effective. So intumescent interruptions should require supporting evidence, and smoke seals should be continuous around the door perimeter. Now, air transfer grills are mentioned in section 10. And the reason why these products, similar to items such as letter plates or door viewers, are because these are products where large apertures can and must be cut into the fire door itself. So this isn't just for a mortise, but this is for an aperture, and an air transfer grill provides a particularly large aperture. So in the same way we talked about before, air transfer grills must have supporting evidence for use on the specific door construction. They must achieve the required fire resistance and, where applicable, smoke leakage performance. Intumescent materials and components used in the fire test, including the likes of metal cover grills, must be installed as tested, and only decorative grills, including in the supporting evidence, are permitted. Now, it talks about the door application, fire containment only, fire resisting doors, for example, FD30, and if there's fire and cold smoke containment, must be suitable for fire and smoke doors for the likes of E30SA, S200 as applicable. Now, when it comes to installation, the installation must follow full manufacturer fitting instructions, must be carried out by competent persons only, and all grills must be commissioned in accordance with the manufacturer's instruction. So note, the same way with letter plates, etc., positioning matters. Grill location can affect the fire performance, and it also states air transfer grills to steel and composite fire doors should be factory fitted. Access control is something that there is a lot more emphasis on within 8214, and these access and security controls, products such as magnetic locks that form part of a fire door, should be planned now in advance with the fire door manufacturer, and it's that supplier who's responsible for ensuring early coordination. So the doors supporting fire test evidence should include the access control item itself, but list it as an approved component of the door assembly. Now, installation methods such as drilling, fixings, cable routes, and you can have cable routes right through a fire door, particularly for a solenoid or motor lock, they must be confirmed as acceptable by the door manufacturer and should be carried out in accordance with the supporting evidence. So electronic locking or access control should not be added after installation without consultation with the fire door supplier or manufacturer. And that happens far too often. Very often access control is seen as an afterthought and then is applied once the door has been installed. Very often, could be 2 or 3 years down the line. It is part of a tested fire door system, should not be treated as an afterthought. Now let's take a look at competence and the necessity for it when specifying door hardware for fire doors. It was talked about earlier with Dame Judith Hackett and the Hackett review post Grenfell. There was a warning within her review that said that competence across the system is patchy. She therefore highlighted widespread failures in skills, qualifications, and understanding across construction, fire safety, maintenance, regulatory rules. And there was an emphasis that industry must undergo a fundamental cultural shift to ensure that only properly trained, qualified, and accountable people work on safety critical aspects of buildings. BS 8214 builds upon this, and it emphasizes that only competent people should specify fire door hardware. A competent person is defined in the standard as an individual, suitably trained and qualified by the appropriate skills, knowledge, practical experience, and provided with the necessary instructions to enable the required tasks to be performed correctly with regard to the appropriate behaviours for the carrying out of these tasks. Those were the 4 elements that were of competence within BS 8214, also in the Building Safety Act. Skills, so these are defined as practical abilities through training or experience. Knowledge, theoretical understanding of procedures, regs, standards. Experience, that's exposure to relevant roles, enhancing judgment and decision making. And behaviours, those are observable actions reflecting professionalism and adaptability. Specifier responsibilities align with CDM, Construction Design and Management Regulations 2015, and that's specifically referenced in 8214. So these are the primary legal frameworks for managing health and safety and welfare in construction products in Great Britain and also in Northern Ireland. So if a hardware change modifies design intent, the individual who does so becomes a designer in the legal sense. Therefore, they carry accountability for performance outcomes. So if you modify design intent, you become a designer. Competent specification must mean in relation to fire doors, you have compatibility between all these items on a fire door, not just hardware, but seals, glazing, door leaf and frame design, and installation allowances. So this reduces the risk of non-compliance or unsafe door performance. Just want to read out specifically what it says in section 10.1. The specification of architectural ironmongery or building hardware for fire doors is a skill which requires high level of competency, and only people who can demonstrate their competency should undertake this task. I did also want to refer to a current standard as well, which is a forthcoming one, BS 8670 Part 2. This will establish core competence criteria for individuals who work with construction products throughout their life cycle. We in the Guild would like to make all present about the importance of this upcoming standard. It's due to commence draft for public comment in May. Please do keep an eye out for it, because that's something which is really important in terms of the competency agenda as well. Now we'll move on to essential and non-essential hardware, which is in Annex D. And there's now expanded clarity on the difference between essential and non-essential hardware. So essential hardware is required for the tested fire resistance performance, whereas non-essential items may still affect the outcome, particularly if they're incorrectly fitted. Essential hardware section includes a non-exhaustive list of products and standards, which includes a number of items including hinges, closing devices, both mechanical and electromechanical, door coordinator devices, escape hardware, again for mechanical and electromechanical, locks and latches, and also intumescent product. All these items are listed within essential hardware. If we move on to non-essential hardware, it's defined within this as items of hardware that are not normally considered necessary for fire performance, but what might be necessary for means of escape or the function of the door. This includes products such as lever handles, pull handles, kicking plates, push plates, and accessories. And we now have an expanded list which includes other products such as mechatronic door furniture. The standard also draws attention to the legal requirement for signage to identify fire doors. So you will see, for example, in approved document B in statutory guidance, a requirement for self-closing fire doors to have fire door keep shut signs on both sides of the leaf. So it does draw attention to that legal requirement, as well as BS 5499, which gives more information on signage on doors. Where enhanced security is required, and that can include the likes of apartment entrance doors, where you may have additional compliance because you may not just have fire, but also security. And this may include PAS 24 or LPS 1175 standards. These cover resistance to forced entry, and they require certain items of hardware such as cylinders or locks or reinforcement components to be tested as part of a complete system. And a number of other security-related standards are listed in this revision. That includes BS 3621 for thief-resistant locks, DHF TS 007 for cylinders, and sole secure standards from the MLA. So this is a new extra requirement that's been put into 8214. Briefly as well, you'll find now that powered pedestrian doors are also now within BS 8214. Now, these operators with a self-closing function are included within the standard, and they should comply with the BSEN 17372 standard and again be included within the supporting evidence for the fire door. Unsupported products on fire doors, including door automation, remember, voids door performance claims, and many installations of powered pedestrian doors happen on existing doors. And that can include products such as not just the item itself, but products such as safety sensors as well. It does also refer to the BSEN 16005 standard within 8214. That's a harmonized standard under the EU Machinery Directive, and that gives a presumption of conformity with the relevant essential health and safety requirements for these items. It should also be noted that due to the requirements of these latest standards, sensors, finger hinge protection is also required. That's me coming towards the end of my section now, but for anybody who has a real passion or interest in architectural ironmongery or door hardware, further publicly available information is available on the gai.org.uk/knowledge. There are specifier guides on the likes of intumescent, on the likes of air transfer grills and fire doors, in addition to end user guides and further guidance. Also, the DHF and GAI Code of Practice for hardware for fire and escape doors, which is mentioned not just in BS 8214, but also in statutory guidance across the UK and Ireland, such as ADB, Technical Booklet E, etc. That's available on firecode.org.uk. Conscious there was a lot of information there on hardware, but obviously it is a critical and key component to a fire door, therefore of huge consequence. Thank you very much, and I'm going to hand back across to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Douglas. I'd now like to welcome back the panelists for a panel discussion for the last section of this webinar. So welcome back to everyone. We've been having quite a few questions coming in. I'd just like to say before we kick off, we're going to get through as many questions as we possibly can. So yes, I'm going to read out some that have just come in. So just bear with me a moment. So the first question is, I believe this one is for Douglas. Yes, it's regarding DigiLocks. Let me just read it out to you. We're always challenged about our smoke seals around doors where there are DigiLocks at ironmongery. What is the current legislation on the gaps between locks and cold smoke seals? Douglas, I think that's probably for you.
Yeah, well, the cold smoke seals are actually referred to in BS 8214 as well, and it does reference that cold smoke seals should be uninterrupted. So that is that's mentioned specifically in BS 8214, and there are various different types of intumescent fire seals and intumescent fire and smoke seals. So it's possible to have an uninterrupted smoke seal the whole way around the door, even if it is even if it's not a part of the intumescent. So there's no specific legislation, but there is guidance which is referred to in BS 8214 as well, and that is, as I say, in the 2026 version too. I don't know if Kevin or Peter have any further thought on that.
No, I mean, other than if there is something that's uninterrupted, it would be a very small area and would need to be supported by the evidence for the smoke seals around the door set to demonstrate that it can still maintain the required leakage rate. But like you say, in 8214, we went down the route to say, really, best practice is uninterrupted.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all. I'll move on to the next question. Can I please confirm that a fire door considered as a certified door under BS 8214/2016 would now be considered as a notional fire door because the evidence regarding specification, etc., are not available? Perhaps Peter, you could answer that one.
So a few mixed things in there, I think, and I'm not sure about the certified under BS 8214 statement. So the certification would be, if it is certification they mean, would be a voluntary third-party certification scheme for the product. and it would be against one of the performance standards that I mentioned, 476 or the EN classification series. So I'm not sure if what's meant it sounds more like the question relates to notional and nominal and existing doors where the information is unknown, but I would need a bit more clarity, unless others think I've got the wrong end of the stick. But
no, Peter, I think it's as you say, it's mixing up regulatory building regulations, classifications, and notional doors with the recommendations in 8214 from 10 years ago. So I would say building regulations are not retrospective. If a fire door conformed with the building regulations at the time it was installed, then it would still perform for that building unless something's changed. If it's inspected and it doesn't meet the current regulation, it'll probably be described as a notional door set because it was installed as a fire door. But the fact that 8214 has been changed we've revised it to the 2026 version wouldn't actually affect the performance of those doors.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. I'll move on to the next question. Kevin, this could be for you. The prescriptive 3mm gap at the leaf threshold has now been removed from BS 8214. How does this affect field of applications that have not expired yet, but state the 3mm is feasible to achieve smoke control? Is this statement still valid as the field of application is still in date?
The organisation that wrote the field of application report should be consulted on that. I think if they're happy to stand behind that, the 3mm gap at the bottom of the door and still provide the smoke control classification, then that's their prerogative. We removed it because we saw test evidence that showed that it was allowing too much smoke penetration. There are also reports of problems in maintaining that gap as a practical consideration under construction and tolerances on a construction site. So if the certificating body is happy to maintain certification for smoke control with whatever they consider it to be providing the necessary level of airflow in the 476 part 31.1 test, then that's their prerogative.
Yeah, just to add to it, I'd be mindful of how it's being referred to in the field of application as well, and whether it's truly relating to smoke or whether it's a gap size relating to fire resistance. And if it's referring to the 3mm, not as a consideration of performance, but actually guidance that was previously contained within 8214 and 9999, which was that you would fit a drop seal for an adequately sealed smoke door, or where not practicable, you would use a 3mm gap, which is more like pointing to old guidance than actually saying a 3mm gap will give you the required leakage rate. I know it's a subtlety, but this is an important one. So to understand really what that is communicating in that field of application is very important as well. And it's something that is picked up in Annex B3 as well, which I went through earlier.
Thank you. We had another question regarding seals. I just need clarification. Can two different types of seals be mixed on the same door set? 10mm fire and smoke mixed with the full width, frame width replacement? I would say no, but need confirmation. Peter, do you want to maybe answer that one?
Sorry, who?
Peter, perhaps, or Kevin?
Yeah, no, I'm fine. What you would pick up on a lot through 8214, which I've touched on as well, is this supporting evidence part. So the answer to a lot of these questions would be it depends, and it will depend on whether that change in seal is supported for the door set in question. The easy default answer is no. Switching out seals is not a guarantee that it will be okay. You would need to understand whether the alternative seal specification is supported for the door in which it's fitted. Just because it's a full width seal does not necessarily mean that that seal will provide the performance that you expected, or that the performance that was originally established with the door with the 10x4. Just because it's perceived to be bigger does not necessarily mean compliant. So some careful detail checking on the supporting evidence. If you haven't got that, then I would say no, you certainly just don't assume that it will be okay to switch these things out. That's not to say it might not get some fire resistance, but if you want the evidence, then that's what you need to get hold of.
Peter. Now I have a question for Douglas. Regarding air transfer grills, if the intumescent air transfer grill activates at around 100 degrees, how can this product stop the spread of coal smoke? Are any other products recommended?
Well, air transfer grills, there's a whole section specifically on it within it, and you can have ones which are either for fire or for fire and smoke. So it depends which product that you actually specify, and you need to ensure that if you're specifying the product, that the correct product is specified for that application. And I think that comes down to what I'd said during my presentation, that it comes down to the specification of product for hardware, and that includes air transfer grills, or any of these items should only be done by people who are competent to actually be able to do it. So there's more than one type of air transfer grill, and it just depends on the application. And again, I just refer, if anybody is looking for further information on air transfer grills, there is a specifier guide with some information on that we have on our website, on the GAI website. Any further thoughts, Peter or Kevin, on that? I think you're on mute, Peter.
I was only going to say the question, how will it? It won't provide ambient smoke control because it would require the intumescence to kick off. So that would be a fire-only grill. So exactly what Douglas has said. It's horses for courses, but no, fitting an intumescent-only air transfer grill will not provide you smoke control at ambient temperatures.
Okay.
Thank you. Perhaps a question for Kevin next. How often should fire doors be inspected, and by who? Should this be by a qualified fire door inspector having undertaken something along the lines of the ABBE qualifications for fire door inspection, or can this be undertaken by site staff if training has been provided, though training but not qualification? Thank you.
And there's a challenge. It depends on where the fire door is. In England, the Fire Safety England regulations will require a certain period for inspection, and I'm sorry, but I can't remember what those periods are in Regulation 10, but there is a regulatory requirement. There'd also be inspections under the fire safety order as well. Whether that under the fire safety order, the inspections are the responsibility of the responsible person. If they choose to employ a qualified fire door inspector, that would be their prerogative, but it's not necessary under Regulation 10. It would be good practice to have regular inspections of the fire doors. It's not just the fire resistance of the doors that should be considered. There should be regular checks of the operating hardware, particularly the hold open devices and the closing devices. So if doors are held open on hold open devices, they should be fail safe and release when required. And the doors should automatically close in position. If there's two doors, the coordinating devices should ensure that they close in the right order, etc. So I don't know the specific periods for specific circumstances, but there are regulations that now in certain parts of the UK require inspections at set times. I don't know if anyone else can remember what those periods are right now.
I think in England it's quarterly. I think it's quarterly checks, and that's specifically for the likes of flat entrance doors from memory. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's only in England, and the other thing to remember is BS 8214 is not a regulation; it's a standard. And yes, the standard is very much referred to in the regulation, but it in itself is not a regulation in itself, and it's not a testing standard. So I think it's worth clarifying that, particularly from some of the earlier questions. You know, can you test a door to BS 8214? No, it refers to the testing standards, to 47622 or 1634 part 1, 2 or 3 or whatever it is. But the standard itself refers to all these and brings it all together in one best practice document.
Yeah. I think there was also a question about what qualifications the inspectors should have. And I think there's a broad range of offers, but it should be that they should demonstrate competence or knowledge. I mean, it's the SCEB statement again. They should have the knowledge to understand what they're looking at. They know to where to get information, and the skill to be able to prepare appropriate reports and make sure they take everything that they're viewing when they do an inspection into consideration appropriately.
Yeah, and just on that as well, it also mentions, and I'd said about this before, and this is not just in 8214, but is finding its way more and more into the likes of the white paper that's out at the moment and the Building Safety Act. It's not just about being competent, it's about that demonstration of competency. So if you have someone who is an inspector who can actually provide that demonstration or a form of demonstration of competency, then obviously that's going to hold more than someone who can't, and someone who's just able to say, oh, I am competent to do that. Demonstration of competency is coming along through different construction products, including fire doors. And bear in mind that fire doors as well are being looked at from a safety critical perspective, as well as mentioned within the white paper. So all the more so that anybody who's dealing in any way with fire doors needs to ensure that competency can be demonstrated.
Thank you. I shall move on to the next question. Perhaps a question for Peter next. Can I confirm that a fire door considered as a certified door under BS 8214 2016 would now be considered as a notional fire door because the evidence regarding specification, etc., are not available?
I think
we had that.
answered this one.
Oh, you have that one. Oh,
yeah.
you've read.
No problem.
Okay. Maybe. Next one then. I will. Okay, this is relating to, oh yes, another question here. It has been observed that BS 8214 2026 has removed fire foams from the table of acceptable fire stopping options, whereas they were included in the equivalent table within BS 8214 2016. Maybe Kevin, do you want to answer that, or Peter?
I mean, I don't mind taking it. I think all three of us could probably take it. We spent a long time on that section. So prior, the 2016 version had some scenarios for install, considered prescriptive install solutions, and the reference to the supporting evidence for some of the materials was not consistently followed, not always understood consistently. So actually the foams that are referred to, they still needed some evidence. They weren't just given in 8214. They were a possible solution in some scenarios, providing you got hold of that evidence, right? With the 2026 version, it was a request from a number of areas of industry that some retention of what you would call prescriptive solutions was retained, and the solutions that were retained are based around rock fibre and mastic, based on a lot of evidence that's been generated over many years in fire test scenarios where fibre and mastic was used between the back of the frame and the structural opening. So the prescriptive solutions now in 8214 are based on the fibre and mastic, whereas it's not stopping you from using foams, but you now need to get hold of that evidence as a solution for the installation of that door set by navigating the supporting evidence that I've been talking about in my presentation earlier. So those alternative materials, they haven't gone. They're just handled by way of supporting evidence, and the prescriptive 8214 based is now focused around fibre and mastic. I hope that answers the question.
Peter, I'll move on to the next question because we haven't got much time. Does the panel agree that the temporary fire doors installed during the construction phase of a new build RC frame tar block, for example, should follow the same principles of selection, testing and installation as outlined in BS 8214/2026? And should they be a door set or a door assembly? Perhaps who wants to answer that? Any of you could answer it, but Peter or Kevin or Douglas, who would like to answer that one? Maybe
Well,
Kevin.
that's interesting. It's looking at the fire protection of the unfinished building. I'm not sure what the requirements are, to tell the truth. I know that the people working on the site need to be protected from fire, and you're probably looking at protecting the construction thus far. But the work that we've been doing on 8214 would look at a finished building with all the fire stopping in place so that it's conforming to the building regulations. A building that's under construction probably doesn't conform with the building regulations until it's to a certain aspect of the construction is fulfilled. If there's a specified performance for a fire door, then it's likely to be in the same testing regimes as we currently have under the British standard testing or European standard testing. Those are the principal methods of demonstrating that a door is a fire door. Whether they should be provided as door sets or door assemblies, as I'm showed, building regulations don't yet specify that there needs to be the provision of the product in any particular way. Again, well, that's why we called it a fire door, not a door set, not a door assembly, etc., because we weren't describing the method of the supply route. So that would still apply to the temporary products on site. Sorry, I don't know what the specific regulatory requirements are for that part of construction, but we would expect that they would still be assessed in the same manner as with other fire doors.
Thank you, Kevin. And not sure who wants to answer this one, maybe Peter or Douglas. What impact will the withdrawal of BS 476 in September 2029 have on door assemblies? Do you think the door sets will become the norm for manufacturers?
That's a good question.
Mhm.
So I can answer it in the classification system was set up in line with the principle of door sets because it was in response to the product standards that for fire doors. Yeah, but it doesn't stop you being able to look at a mode of supply where the final piece of evidence that's handed over is a classification report supported by an XAP and some EN data. So the question, and it often gets confused, and it was a central point to some of the straightening out within clarifications within 8214. The European classification system is not the product standard system. They are supporting standards that tell you how to test and extend and classify the performance of the door. It has a door set focus because of the way in which the mandate was set for the product standard, but it doesn't exclusively mean it only works for door sets, because feasibly you could provide things from different legal entities, pull something together on site, and still wave around a classification report, submit a classification report is more appropriate, as the supporting evidence for that thing that's been completed on site. It may well drive people towards door sets, but I think something that's likely to drive it that way will be more likely a regulatory change, maybe when the product standards are ready for internal and external doors, CE and UKCA, or perhaps as we move forward with products critical to safe construction and door sets are identified, if that has a particular mode of supply that they'd rather see for it, that's going to have more of an influence. So that's a bit of a, I don't know, an answer, but not saying that it would necessarily drive it in a particular way. But I hope that's of use.
Yeah, if I can add on to that as well, the sort of door assembly versus door sets debate has raged for many years. And all I would say is it's a long time between now and September 2029. One of the reasons why the UK government allowed a 5-year coexistence period between whenever ADB was published with the change in direction between 2024 and 2029 was because there was a realization in government that this isn't simple. If it was simple, there wouldn't have been a 5-year coexistence. So the whole issue of certification, classifications, assessments, whilst they're ingrained at the moment in the September 2029 version, there will be changes need to be made. Peter alluded earlier to the new standard BS 8623, which is going to be the new assessment standard, which is going to replace the PFPF, Passive Fire Protection Forum guidance for assessment. And there is also going to be other changes that will potentially look to come in as well. So yeah, I would say don't go ahead and just write off door assemblies, as they're not going to be the way to go, because the other issue as well is that there needs to be the capacity issue. The 476 and the 1634 is, yes, it's mentioned in ADB, but it's ADB only. It's only in England. Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland have each one have their own, for devolved government, have their own statutory guidance, and not all of them at the moment have this. Very often they'll adopt a wait and see what's happening. And I do know that, for example, in the Republic of Ireland, for existing buildings, they have retained 47622. So it's not a slam dunk. It's not a silver bullet, and there's a long time between now and September 2029. So let's just wait and see what happens.
Thank you, Douglas. I'm conscious we're running out of time now. So thank you to our panel experts for a really interesting webinar today. I'd like to hand the floor back to Kevin Underwood, just for some brief closing remarks. Over to you, Kevin.
Thank you. Well, I hope everyone attending this webinar appreciated the work that's gone into BS 8214, and I would also hope that everyone finds that the revision is valuable and workable for the jobs that they are doing. It was very much an insight to me to be chair, and I thank the committee and everyone supporting us to do the work. But I'd also like to encourage the people on this webinar to consider joining us in standards work, particularly on a project like BS 8214, where we have quite a lot of discretion on who can join a panel in the work on the revision. And we are enabled to co-opt people for their experience and expertise that would be able to make a beneficial contribution to the work. As I think we said, they had 19 people on the committee, and it was invaluable, the contributions they made. And you saw by the time, the period that was necessary to run the project, that there was a lot of work involved. I think towards, as we were finishing up on the public comments, we were meeting every 2 weeks and doing homework to keep abreast of all the changes that were necessary. So I worry that people may feel that they are barred from taking part in standards development. You do, in the main committees, need to have a sponsoring body behind you. It's not always the case. Again, there are room for other people to come and join committees, but particularly on the panels, particularly on the projects. So look out for the DPCs when we're projecting projects. And if you'd like to take part, just let us know. Again, thank you to everybody, and thank you for attending today. It was a good project. It was great working with everybody, and I hope you had a good experience today. Just got a few more seconds.